The morning fog rolled across the Coronado Beach training grounds as Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. At 24, she had already proven herself in the Marines, but this was different. This was the Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School, the gateway to becoming a Navy SEAL. The salty air mixed with the sound of waves crashing against the shore, but Sarah's focus was entirely on the imposing building ahead of her. She had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old, watching a documentary about elite military units with her father. While other girls her age were dreaming of careers in fashion or entertainment, Sarah was doing push-ups in her backyard and reading every military biography she could find. Her father, a retired Army sergeant, had initially discouraged her ambitions, warning her about the physical and mental challenges she would face. But Sarah's determination only grew stronger with each obstacle. The first person she encountered was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks and a stare that could cut through steel. He looked her up and down with obvious skepticism, his eyes lingering on her 5'6" frame. Sarah knew what he was thinking. At 140 pounds, she was significantly smaller than the male candidates who surrounded her, most of whom looked like they could bench press a small car. "Martinez," Chief Thompson called out, consulting his clipboard. "You sure you're in the right place? The administrative building is back that way." Sarah stepped forward, her spine straight and her voice clear. "Chief, I'm here for SEAL prep training, and I'm exactly where I need to be." A few of the male candidates snickered behind her. One of them, a tall blond man with the build of a football player, whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "This should be interesting. Wonder how long she'll last." Chief Thompson raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. He led the group of 30 candidates into the main briefing room, where the walls were lined with photographs of SEAL teams in action. The images showed men in combat gear, their faces painted with determination and grit. Sarah noticed she was the only woman in the room, but she had expected this. What she hadn't expected was the level of hostility she could feel radiating from some of her fellow candidates. The briefing was led by Commander James Harrison, a lean man with gray temples and scars on his hands that spoke of years in the field. He explained the structure of the program with military precision. The preparatory course would last 8 weeks and would test every aspect of their physical and mental capabilities. Only about 30% of candidates typically made it through to the actual basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Harrison began, his eyes scanning the room. "You are here because someone believes you have the potential to join one of the world's most elite fighting forces. But potential means nothing without execution. Over the next 8 weeks, you will be pushed beyond what you believe are your limits. Some of you will discover reserves of strength you never knew you had. Others will discover that their limits are exactly where they thought they were." Sarah absorbed every word, her mind already strategizing how she would approach each challenge. She had spent the last 2 years preparing for this moment, training with a former SEAL instructor who had agreed to help her after seeing her determination. Her daily routine had included swimming in the ocean before dawn, running with a weighted pack, and countless hours of calisthenics and mental preparation. After the briefing, the candidates were assigned to their barracks. Sarah found herself in a room with 3 bunks, sharing space with 2 male candidates who introduced themselves as Jake Morrison from Texas and Alex Chin from California. Jake, the blond man who had made the earlier comment, made no effort to hide his skepticism about her presence. Alex seemed more reserved, offering a polite nod but keeping his distance. "So, Martinez," Jake said as he unpacked his gear, "what's your background? Let me guess, you were an admin clerk or something." Sarah continued organizing her belongings without looking up. "Marine Corps, 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Combat engineer." Jake's expression shifted slightly. "Combat engineer? You actually saw action?" "More than most," Sarah replied simply. She wasn't interested in proving herself through words. Actions would speak louder than anything she could say. That evening, the candidates gathered for their first physical training session. Chief Thompson stood before them in the setting sun, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the beach. The session would be a baseline assessment to gauge everyone's current fitness level. "We're going to start simple," Chief Thompson announced. "A 2-mile run on the beach, followed by a basic calisthenics circuit. This isn't about competition today. This is about seeing where you all stand." The run began at a moderate pace, but within the first half-mile, several candidates began to string out. Sarah found herself in the middle of the pack, maintaining a steady rhythm while monitoring the other runners around her. She had learned long ago that the key to endurance events wasn't starting fast, but finishing strong. Jake had positioned himself near the front of the group, clearly trying to establish himself as one of the alpha candidates. His running form was strong, but Sarah could see tension in his shoulders that suggested he might be pushing too hard too early. Alex ran with mechanical precision, his breathing controlled and his stride efficient. As they rounded the 1-mile mark, Sarah began to gradually increase her pace. She moved past several candidates who were already showing signs of fatigue. The sand provided an unstable surface that challenged every muscle in her legs and core, but this was familiar terrain for her. She had run hundreds of miles on beaches during her marine training. By the 1.5-mile mark, Sarah had moved into the top 10 runners. She could hear Jake's breathing becoming more labored ahead of her, and several of the larger candidates were beginning to fall back. The key, she knew, was to finish this run strong enough to still perform well in the calisthenics circuit that would follow. As they approached the 2-mile finish line, Sarah made her move. She passed 3 more candidates in the final quarter mile, including Jake, who looked shocked as she glided past him with what appeared to be energy in reserve. She finished 5th overall, breathing hard but still in control. The calisthenics circuit consisted of push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a series of other exercises designed to test functional strength. Sarah approached each station methodically, focusing on perfect form rather than trying to rush through the movements. She had learned that proper technique was more important than raw speed, especially when fatigue began to set in. At the pull-up bar, several of the larger candidates struggled with their own body weight. Sarah's smaller frame worked to her advantage here, and she completed her required repetitions with room to spare. She noticed Chief Thompson watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. During the push-up portion, Jake was positioned next to her. He started strong, his large frame powering through the first 20 repetitions with ease. But, as the count continued, his form began to deteriorate. His back started to sag, and his range of motion decreased with each repetition. Sarah maintained her steady rhythm, her form remaining crisp and controlled. She had done thousands of push-ups over the years, and her muscle memory kicked in even as fatigue began to accumulate. When Chief Thompson called time, she had completed 42 perfect repetitions to Jake's 38, several of which probably wouldn't have counted due to poor form. As the session concluded, Sarah could feel the eyes of her fellow candidates on her. Some looked surprised, others impressed, and a few appeared resentful. She had performed well, but she knew this was only the beginning. The real challenges were yet to come. Back in the barracks that night, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Jake was quieter than he had been earlier, and even Alex seemed to regard her with new respect. Sarah used the time to write in her journal, a habit she had maintained throughout her military career. She wrote about her goals for the program and the challenges she expected to face. The next morning began before dawn with the sound of Chief Thompson's whistle. The candidates stumbled out of their bunks and formed up outside the barracks in their physical training uniforms. The morning air was crisp, and Sarah could see her breath as she joined the formation. "Today we begin your real education," Chief Thompson announced. "Yesterday was just a warm-up. Today you start learning what it means to be part of a team and what it means to never quit." The morning session began with a team-building exercise that involved carrying large logs as a group. The candidates were divided into teams of 6, and Sarah found herself grouped with Jake, Alex, and 3 other men. The logs weighed approximately 200 pounds and had to be carried over a course that included sand dunes, obstacle walls, and shallow water. Initially, there was some confusion about how to organize the team. Several of the men seemed to assume that Sarah should be positioned in the middle where she would bear less of the weight. But, as they lifted the log for the first time, it became clear that her position would depend more on height compatibility than on any assumptions about her strength. The first part of the course went smoothly, with the team finding a rhythm as they moved across the flat sand. But, as they approached the first sand dune, the challenge intensified dramatically. The soft sand provided poor footing, and the incline made every step a battle against gravity and the shifting surface. Sarah found herself at the front of the log, helping to guide the team up the steep slope. Her shorter stature actually worked to her advantage here, as she could maintain better balance on the unstable surface. Behind her, she could hear Jake struggling with the combination of the weight and the awkward footing. "Stay together," she called back to the team. "Keep the pressure even across the log." Halfway up the dune, one of the team members stumbled and lost his grip. The sudden shift in weight distribution caused the entire team to stagger, and For a moment, it looked like they might drop the log entirely. Sarah immediately shifted her position to compensate for the lost support, straining against the additional weight while the team member regained his grip. "Got it," the man called out, and the team resumed their climb. When they reached the top of the dune, several of the team members were breathing heavily. Sarah was tired, but still felt strong. She had learned during her Marine training that mental toughness was often more important than physical strength in these situations. The mind gave up long before the body reached its actual limits. The obstacle wall portion of the course required the team to carry the log over a 6-foot barrier. This presented a coordination challenge that went beyond simple strength. They had to work together to lift the log overhead, while some team members climbed over the wall to receive it on the other side. Sarah volunteered to be one of the climbers, scaling the wall quickly and positioning herself to help guide the log over. Her upper body strength, developed through years of pull-ups and rope climbing, served her well as she helped control the log's descent on the far side of the wall. The final portion of the course took the team through shallow water that reached mid-thigh level. The water added the challenge of maintaining footing on a slippery bottom while continuing to support the log's weight. The cold water also began to sap energy from everyone's legs. As they approached the finish line, Sarah could see that several other teams were still struggling with earlier portions of the course. Her team had maintained good coordination throughout the exercise, and they finished third overall out of 5 teams. Chief Thompson gathered all the candidates at the finish line for a debrief. "Some of you did well today," he said, his eyes scanning the group. "Others learned some hard lessons about teamwork and communication. Remember, in the real world, your teammates' lives depend on your ability to work together effectively." After the morning exercise, the candidates returned to the classroom for instruction on Navy SEAL history and mission parameters. The instructor was a retired SEAL Master Chief named Robert Sullivan, whose weathered face and calm demeanor spoke of decades of experience in special operations. Master Chief Sullivan began with the origins of the SEAL teams during World War II, explaining how the need for specialized maritime operations had led to the development of underwater demolition teams. He described the evolution of these units through the Korean War, Vietnam, and into the modern era of global counterterrorism operations. Sarah found herself fascinated by the stories of SEAL operations during the Vietnam War. The tales of small units operating behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence, and conducting direct action missions resonated with her own experiences in Afghanistan. She had been part of similar operations, though on a smaller scale and in a different environment. The instructor emphasized the importance of mental preparation and psychological resilience. "Physical strength and endurance are table stakes," Master Chief Sullivan explained. "Everyone who gets to BUD/S training is already in excellent physical condition. What separates those who succeed from those who quit is mental toughness and the ability to function under extreme stress." He went on to describe some of the psychological challenges that SEAL candidates would face during their training. Sleep deprivation, cold water immersion, and constant pressure were designed to identify individuals who could maintain their effectiveness even when pushed beyond normal human limits. During the lunch break, Sarah sat with Alex and another candidate named David Rodriguez, who had introduced himself as a former Army Ranger. The conversation naturally turned to their backgrounds and motivations for pursuing SEAL training. "I've wanted to do this since I was a kid," Alex admitted. "My uncle was a SEAL in the 80s, and his stories always inspired me. I've been training specifically for this program for the past 3 years." David nodded in understanding. "For me, it's about pushing myself to the highest level possible. I enjoyed my time as a Ranger, but I always wondered if I could handle the ultimate challenge." When they turned to Sarah, she considered her response carefully. "I've always believed that limitations are mostly in our minds," she said. "I want to prove, to myself and to others, that determination and preparation can overcome any obstacle." Jake, who was sitting at a nearby table, overheard the conversation. "That's a nice sentiment," he said with a hint of skepticism in his voice. "But at some point, physical reality kicks in. There's a reason why certain standards exist." Sarah met his gaze steadily. Standards exist to ensure capability, not to exclude people arbitrarily. If someone can meet the standards, their gender, size, or background shouldn't matter. The afternoon training session focused on water confidence skills in the base swimming pool. The candidates were required to demonstrate basic swimming competency and comfort in the water while wearing uniforms and boots. This was followed by treading water exercises and basic water survival techniques. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, but the added weight of the uniform and boots created new challenges. The key was to remain calm and efficient in the water, conserving energy while maintaining proper position. She had practiced these skills extensively during her preparation, often swimming in the ocean while wearing her full marine combat gear. The treading water exercise lasted 20 minutes, during which the candidates had to maintain their position without touching the sides or bottom of the pool. Several of the larger candidates began to struggle after about 10 minutes, their greater muscle mass working against them in the water. Sarah found her rhythm early and maintained it throughout the exercise. Her smaller frame and efficient technique allowed her to conserve energy while keeping her head comfortably above water. She noticed Chief Thompson watching her performance carefully, though his expression remained neutral. As the day concluded, Sarah reflected on her performance during the various exercises. She had held her own in every activity and had actually excelled in several areas. But she also understood that this was only the first day of an 8-week program that would progressively become more challenging. That evening, she called her father from the phone in the barracks common area. He had been skeptical of her decision to pursue SEAL training, worried about the physical demands and the potential for injury. But he had also been her biggest supporter throughout her military career. "How was the first day?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "It went well, Dad," Sarah replied. "The physical training was challenging, but manageable. I think some of the other candidates were surprised by my performance." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Remember, sweetheart, you don't have anything to prove to anyone but yourself. Stay focused on your goals, and don't let other people's expectations or limitations affect your performance." Sarah smiled at his words. Throughout her life, her father had taught her that success came from internal motivation rather than external validation. It was a lesson that had served her well during her Marine deployments and would be even more important during the weeks ahead. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah reviewed her performance from the day and began mentally preparing for the challenges that would come tomorrow. She knew that the instructors would progressively increase the difficulty of the training, and she would need to be ready to adapt and overcome whatever obstacles they placed in her path. The barracks were quiet except for the sound of waves in the distance and the occasional whispered conversation between candidates. Sarah fell asleep thinking about her goals and the long journey that lay ahead. She had taken the first step successfully, but the real test was just beginning. 3 weeks into the program, Sarah had established herself as one of the most consistent performers in her class. The daily routine had settled into a predictable rhythm of pre-dawn physical training, classroom instruction, and afternoon practical exercises. Each day brought new challenges designed to test different aspects of their capabilities, but Sarah had managed to excel in most areas while showing steady improvement in others. The morning began with what Chief Thompson called surf torture, an exercise designed to test mental toughness and cold water tolerance. The candidates lay in the surf in their uniforms, allowing the cold Pacific Ocean waves to wash over them while maintaining military bearing and following commands. The water temperature was 58 degrees, cold enough to cause immediate discomfort and eventual hypothermia if exposure continued too long. Sarah positioned herself in the sand alongside her classmates as the first wave crashed over them. The shock of the cold water took her breath away momentarily, but she had experienced similar conditions during winter training exercises with the Marines. The key was to control her breathing and maintain mental focus despite the physical discomfort. Chief Thompson stood on the beach above them, his voice carrying over the sound of the waves. "Some of you are thinking about how cold you are right now. Some of you are thinking about how much you want this to be over. But the ones who will succeed are thinking about why they're here and what they're trying to accomplish." Wave after wave crashed over the prone candidates, each one seeming colder than the last. Sarah could hear teeth chattering around her, and she knew that several of her classmates were struggling with the psychological pressure of the exercise. The cold was one thing, but the feeling of helplessness that came with lying still while being pounded by waves was something else entirely. After 20 minutes in the surf, Chief Thompson ordered the candidates to stand and perform jumping jacks to restore circulation. Sarah's muscles felt stiff and unresponsive from the cold, but she forced herself to execute the movements with precision. Around her, several candidates were moving slowly and appeared to be having difficulty with coordination. Jake, who had been positioned next to her during the exercise, was shivering violently as he attempted to do the jumping jacks. His larger frame, which had been an advantage in many previous exercises, had worked against him in the cold water. More muscle mass meant more surface area for heat loss, and his body was struggling to maintain core temperature. "You okay, Morrison?" Sarah asked quietly as they moved through the exercise. Jake nodded, though his coordination was clearly affected by the cold. "Just need to get the blood flowing again," he managed to say through chattering teeth. The exercise concluded with a run along the beach to restore full circulation and body temperature. As they ran, Sarah could feel warmth gradually returning to her extremities. The combination of movement and her body's natural heat production was overcoming the effects of the cold water exposure. During the run, she found herself running alongside David Rodriguez, the former Army Ranger who had become one of her closest allies in the program. David had proven to be both physically capable and mentally tough, and he had never shown any of the skepticism about her presence that some of the other candidates had displayed. "How are you handling the psychological pressure?" David asked as they maintained their pace on the soft sand. Sarah considered the question before responding. "I think about why I'm here," she said. "Every time it gets difficult, I remind myself that this is exactly what I signed up for. The discomfort is temporary, but quitting would be permanent." David nodded in understanding. "I've been thinking about that too. Some of the guys seem to be struggling more with the mental aspects than the physical ones." This was true. Over the past 3 weeks, candidates had voluntarily withdrawn from the program. In each case, they had been performing adequately in the physical training but had struggled with the psychological pressure of the constant evaluation and stress. The afternoon training session focused on small unit tactics and teamwork under pressure. The candidates were divided into 6-person teams and given a series of problem-solving exercises that required both physical capability and tactical thinking. The scenarios were designed to simulate some of the challenges that SEAL teams might face in real-world operations. Sarah's team consisted of herself, David, Alex, Jake, and 2 other candidates named Tom Bradley and Mike Stevens. The first exercise required them to move a simulated casualty across an obstacle course while under time pressure and simulated enemy fire. The casualty was represented by a 180-pound dummy that had to be carried, dragged, or transported using improvised stretchers. The obstacle course included walls to climb, trenches to cross, and areas where they had to low crawl under simulated barbed wire. Sarah immediately began analyzing the problem from a tactical perspective. "We need to think about this systematically," she said to her team. "The fastest route isn't necessarily the best route if it exposes us to more simulated enemy fire." Tom Bradley, a former Navy surface warfare officer, disagreed. "Speed is the most important factor here. The longer we're exposed, the more likely we are to take casualties." The team debated the approach for a few minutes before settling on a compromise plan that balanced speed with tactical considerations. They would move quickly through the open areas, but take more time to properly navigate the obstacles where speed alone wouldn't be sufficient. The execution of the plan required precise coordination. Sarah and David took the lead positions, responsible for navigating obstacles and providing security while the others managed the casualty. The dummy was heavier and more awkward than any of them had expected, and its dead weight made every movement more difficult. At the first wall obstacle, they had to figure out how to get the casualty over a 6-foot barrier. Sarah volunteered to climb over first and help receive the dummy from the other side. Her agility and upper body strength made her the logical choice for this task, despite some initial hesitation from Tom about whether she could handle the weight. As the team lifted the dummy toward the top of the wall, Sarah positioned herself to guide it over. The awkward angle and the dead weight of the dummy made this more challenging than she had anticipated, but she managed to control its descent while David climbed over to help support the other end. The low crawl section proved to be particularly challenging with the casualty in tow. They had to figure out how to move the dummy under the simulated barbed wire without getting tangled up or leaving anyone exposed. Sarah suggested a technique she had learned during her combat engineer training, where they would roll the dummy sideways while team members crawled alongside to guide it. The technique worked well, and they managed to navigate the obstacle more efficiently than several of the other teams. As they approached the finish line, Sarah could see that they were among the first 3 teams to complete the exercise. Chief Thompson gathered all the teams for a debrief after the exercise concluded. "Some of you showed good tactical thinking today," he said. "Others relied too heavily on individual strength instead of teamwork and problem-solving. Remember, in the real world, the mission success depends on the team, not on any individual performer." During the debrief, Sarah's team received praise for their systematic approach to the problem and their efficient execution. Chief Thompson specifically mentioned their technique for navigating the low-crawl obstacle as an example of creative problem-solving under pressure. After the training session, Sarah joined several of her classmates for dinner in the base dining facility. The conversation naturally turned to their experiences during the afternoon exercise and their observations about how different candidates were handling the various challenges. Alex had noticed that some of the candidates who had appeared strongest during the initial physical assessments were struggling with the team-based exercises. It seems like some guys are used to being individual performers, and they're having trouble adapting to situations where success depends on group coordination. David agreed with this assessment. The guys who have previous military experience seem to be adapting better to the team exercises. The individual athletes are struggling more with the collaborative aspects. Jake, who had been quieter than usual during dinner, finally spoke up. I have to admit, I came into this program thinking it was primarily about individual physical capability. I'm learning that the mental and team aspects are just as important. This was a significant admission from Jake, who had initially been one of the most skeptical about Sarah's capabilities. Over the past 3 weeks, his attitude had gradually shifted as he observed her consistent performance across different types of challenges. That evening, the candidates participated in a night navigation exercise that tested their ability to move across unfamiliar terrain using only a compass and map. They worked in pairs, with each pair given a different route to follow and checkpoints to locate in the darkness. Sarah was paired with Alex for the exercise, and they were assigned a route that covered approximately 3 miles through the hills behind the base. The terrain was rocky and uneven, with dense vegetation that made movement difficult even in daylight. Navigation in darkness required a completely different set of skills than the physical challenges they had been facing during the day. They had to move carefully to avoid injury while maintaining their bearing and tracking their progress on the map. Sarah took the lead on navigation, using the compass and map to establish their initial bearing, while Alex focused on route selection and obstacle avoidance. They had practiced these skills during their Marine and Navy training respectively, but the combination of unfamiliar terrain and time pressure created new challenges. The first checkpoint was located on a hilltop approximately 1 mile from their starting point. The approach required them to climb a steep slope covered with loose rocks and scrub brush. In the darkness, every step required careful consideration to avoid twisted ankles or falls. "How are you doing with the bearing?" Alex asked quietly as they paused to check their position. Sarah consulted the compass and compared their current location to their planned route. "We're slightly to the east of where we should be, but we can correct on the approach to the checkpoint." They adjusted their route and continued climbing toward the checkpoint. The physical exertion of moving uphill in the dark while carrying their gear was significant, but Sarah found that her endurance training was serving her well. Her breathing remained controlled, and her legs felt strong despite the challenging terrain. When they reached the first checkpoint, they found the marker exactly where it should have been according to their map. Sarah recorded the required information while Alex prepared for the next leg of their route. The second checkpoint was located in a valley approximately 1.5 miles away, requiring them to descend from their current position and then follow a creek bed through dense vegetation. This portion of the route would test their ability to navigate in confined terrain where visibility was even more limited. The descent proved to be more challenging than the climb had been. Moving downhill in the dark required constant attention to footing, and the loose rocks created multiple opportunities for injury. Sarah and Alex developed a technique where one person would move a few steps ahead and then provide guidance to their partner about obstacles and safe footing. When they reached the creek bed, they found that recent rains had created muddy conditions that made movement slow and treacherous. They had to balance the need to maintain their bearing with the practical requirement of finding solid footing in the marshy ground. "This is harder than I expected," Alex admitted as he struggled through a particularly muddy section. Sarah was ahead of him, testing each step before committing her full weight. "The key is to stay patient and systematic. If we rush, we'll end up lost or injured." They located the second checkpoint after some searching, discovering that the marker was partially hidden by vegetation that had grown up around it. This taught them an important lesson about the difference between theoretical navigation and practical application in challenging conditions. The final checkpoint was located back on higher ground, requiring them to climb out of the creek bed and navigate across a ridge line to reach their objective. By this point, they had been moving for over 2 hours, and fatigue was beginning to affect their decision-making. Sarah noticed that Alex was starting to make small errors in his route selection, choosing paths that looked easier but actually required more energy expenditure. She gently corrected these decisions without making him feel criticized, understanding that maintaining team cohesion was just as important as reaching their objective. As they approached the final checkpoint, they could see lights in the distance indicating that other pairs had already completed their routes. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction that they had maintained good navigation accuracy throughout the exercise, even if they weren't the fastest team to finish. When they finally reached the checkpoint, Chief Thompson was waiting with a clipboard to record their completion time and verify that they had successfully located all 3 points. Martinez and Chun, he said, consulting his notes, clean navigation throughout the route. Good teamwork and problem-solving. The exercise concluded with all teams gathering at the base of the hill for a debrief. Several pairs had become lost during the exercise and had to be retrieved by instructors. Others had cut corners or made navigation errors that would have resulted in mission failure in a real-world scenario. Tonight you learned the difference between moving through terrain and navigating through terrain, Chief Thompson explained. Physical movement is only half the challenge. Mental discipline and systematic execution are equally important. As they walked back to the barracks, Sarah reflected on her performance during the evening exercise. She had successfully applied skills learned during her previous military training to a new and challenging situation. More importantly, she had worked effectively as part of a team and had helped her partner succeed as well. Alex was full of praise for her navigation skills as they cleaned their gear back in the barracks. "I don't know how you stayed so focused on the compass work while dealing with all those obstacles," he said. "I would have gotten us lost for sure if I had been doing the navigation." Sarah appreciated his acknowledgement, but she also recognized that his route selection and obstacle avoidance had been equally important to their success. "It was definitely a team effort," she replied. "Your ability to find safe paths through the difficult terrain was what kept us moving efficiently." Over the following days, Sarah noticed a gradual shift in how her fellow candidates interacted with her. The initial skepticism and occasional hostility had been replaced by a more respectful recognition of her capabilities. She was being included in planning discussions and was often asked for her input on tactical problems. This change was particularly evident during a combat swimming exercise that took place in the base swimming pool. The candidates had to swim underwater while wearing full gear, simulating infiltration techniques used by SEAL teams during maritime operations. The exercise required them to swim the length of the pool underwater while carrying a waterproof pack containing simulated equipment. They then had to surface, tread water while assembling a piece of equipment, and swim back underwater to the starting point. Sarah's smaller lung capacity initially seemed like it would be a disadvantage in this exercise, but her efficient swimming technique and ability to remain calm underwater compensated for this limitation. She completed the underwater portions without difficulty and demonstrated excellent water confidence during the surface intervals. During the equipment assembly portion, her previous experience with military hardware proved valuable. She was able to quickly and accurately assemble the simulated device while treading water, completing the task faster than most of her classmates. Jake, who had struggled with the underwater swimming due to his larger frame and higher oxygen consumption, watched her performance with obvious respect. After the exercise, he approached her with what appeared to be genuine curiosity about her training background. "Martinez," he said, "how did you develop such good water skills?" "That was some of the smoothest underwater swimming I've seen." Sarah explained that she had spent considerable time preparing for the program by swimming in the ocean near her home base. She had practiced underwater swimming and combat swimming techniques with a former SEAL instructor who had helped her develop efficient techniques that worked with her smaller frame. Jake listened carefully to her explanation, and Sarah could see that he was genuinely interested in learning from her experience. This was a significant change from his initial dismissive attitude, and it reflected the broader shift in how she was being perceived by her classmates. The fourth week of the program concluded with a comprehensive practical exercise that combined many of the skills they had been developing. The scenario involved a simulated direct action mission where teams had to infiltrate a target, gather intelligence, and extract without being detected by opposing forces. Sarah's team was assigned a particularly challenging scenario that required them to approach their target from the water, conduct a reconnaissance mission, and then extract through difficult terrain. The exercise would test their swimming skills, land navigation, tactical movement, and ability to operate under pressure. The mission began before dawn, with the team entering the water from a small boat positioned several hundred meters offshore. They had to swim to the beach while keeping their equipment dry and maintaining team cohesion in the dark water. Sarah took point during the swim approach, using her strong swimming skills to set a pace that the entire team could maintain. The water was choppy due to offshore winds, and several team members struggled with the conditions. Sarah periodically checked on the team's formation and adjusted her pace to ensure that no one was left behind. When they reached the beach, they had to quickly transition from swimming to land movement while remaining undetected by the opposing forces. This required careful coordination and disciplined movement techniques that they had been practicing throughout the program. The reconnaissance portion of the mission required them to approach a simulated enemy position and gather specific intelligence without being observed. Sarah's small size proved to be an advantage during this phase, as she was able to move through the vegetation with less noise and visual signature than her larger teammates. She successfully gathered the required intelligence and reported back to the team with detailed information about the simulated enemy positions and capabilities. Her observations were accurate and complete, demonstrating that she had absorbed the reconnaissance techniques taught during their classroom instruction. The extraction phase of the mission proved to be the most challenging, as the team had to move several kilometers through difficult terrain while avoiding detection by roving patrols. Sarah's navigation skills were crucial during this phase, as she helped guide the team through a complex route that avoided the most likely patrol areas. When they finally reached the extraction point, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The exercise had tested every skill they had been developing over the past 4 weeks, and her team had performed exceptionally well. More importantly, she had proven to herself and to her teammates that she could perform effectively in complex operational scenarios. Chief Thompson's debrief of the exercise was particularly positive for Sarah's team. He praised their tactical discipline, effective teamwork, and successful mission execution. He specifically mentioned Sarah's leadership during the water approach and her accurate reconnaissance work. As the 4th week came to an end, Sarah realized that she had successfully navigated the most challenging phase of her preparation for SEAL training. She had proven her physical capabilities, demonstrated her tactical skills, and earned the respect of her classmates and instructors. But she also knew that the most difficult challenges still lay ahead. The 5th week marked a significant escalation in the intensity and complexity of the training program. Chief Thompson announced during the Monday morning formation that they would begin advanced combat techniques and stress inoculation exercises designed to simulate the extreme pressures that SEAL operators face in real-world combat situations. Sarah had been anticipating this phase of the training with both excitement and apprehension. She knew that her physical capabilities had been thoroughly tested and validated over the past month, but the advanced combat training would present new challenges that went beyond simple strength and endurance. The week began with hand-to-hand combat instruction under the guidance of Master Chief Sullivan, who had extensive experience in close-quarters battle techniques. The training took place in a dedicated martial arts facility equipped with padded floors and various training apparatus. Combat is chaotic and unpredictable, Master Chief Sullivan explained to the assembled candidates. Your weapon might malfunction, you might run out of ammunition, or you might find yourself in a situation where firearms aren't practical. When that happens, your ability to engage in hand-to-hand combat could mean the difference between mission success and mission failure. The first lesson focused on basic defensive techniques and situational awareness. The candidates learned how to identify potential threats, maintain defensive positioning, and react appropriately to different types of attacks. Sarah found that her smaller size required her to rely more heavily on technique and leverage than on raw strength. Master Chief Sullivan demonstrated various defensive moves, showing how proper body positioning and timing could allow a smaller defender to neutralize a larger attacker. Size and strength are advantages, he explained, but they're not insurmountable advantages. Intelligence, training, and determination can level the playing field. The practical portion of the lesson involved partnered practice where candidates took turns executing defensive techniques against simulated attacks. Sarah was initially paired with Alex, whose similar size and technical approach made for good training dynamics. As they practiced the defensive movements, Sarah found that her background in martial arts, which she had studied during her teenage years, was coming back to her. The muscle memory for proper stance, balance, and movement patterns had been dormant, but not lost. You've done this before, Alex observed as they worked through a series of defensive scenarios. Your movements are too smooth for this to be completely new. Sarah explained that she had studied karate and jiu-jitsu during high school, but hadn't maintained consistent practice during her military career. I'm finding that the fundamentals are still there, even though I'm rusty on the specifics. After the basic defensive techniques, Master Chief Sullivan moved on to more aggressive combat techniques, including strikes, throws, and submission holds. This portion of the training was more physically demanding and required candidates to demonstrate both technical skill and mental toughness. The candidates rotated through different partners to experience various fighting styles and physical challenges. When Sarah was paired with Jake for a grappling exercise, the size difference became immediately apparent. Jake had nearly 40 pounds on her and significantly longer reach, advantages that would be difficult to overcome through technique alone. Remember, Master Chief Sullivan called out as he observed the pairs, this isn't about winning or losing. This is about learning to function effectively when you're at a physical disadvantage. The grappling exercise required them to work from various positions, including situations where one person had achieved a dominant position over their partner. Sarah found herself at a significant disadvantage when Jake was able to use his weight and size to control her positioning. However, she also discovered that her flexibility and speed allowed her to escape from positions that might trap a less agile opponent. When she was able to maintain distance and use movement to her advantage, she could apply techniques effectively even against Jake's superior strength. The most challenging part of the exercise came when Master Chief Sullivan introduced stress factors designed to simulate combat conditions. Loud noises, strobe lights, and shouted commands were added to create a disorienting environment that tested the candidate's ability to maintain focus under pressure. Sarah found that her combat experience in Afghanistan had prepared her better than she had realized for this type of stress inoculation. The combination of sensory overload and physical demands was familiar from firefights and combat engineering missions where she had been required to perform technical tasks while under enemy fire. During one particularly intense scenario, she found herself grappling with Tom Bradley while strobe lights flashed and instructors shouted contradictory commands. The sensory overload made it difficult to maintain focus on the physical techniques, but Sarah was able to compartmentalize the distractions and execute her moves effectively. Good adaptation to stress, Martinez, Master Chief Sullivan observed. You maintained technical execution despite the environmental factors. The afternoon session introduced weapons retention techniques, teaching candidates how to maintain control of their weapons during close-quarters combat. This training was critical because SEAL operators often found themselves in situations where enemies might attempt to disarm them during close engagements. The exercise used training weapons that were weighted to simulate real firearms, but were safe for practice purposes. Candidates learned how to maintain positive control of their weapons while engaging in hand-to-hand combat, and how to recover their weapons if they were temporarily lost during an engagement. Sarah's smaller hands initially created challenges in maintaining a secure grip on the larger training weapons, but she adapted by modifying her grip technique and using both hands whenever possible to maintain control. She also learned to use her lower center of gravity to her advantage when opponents attempted to overpower her weapon retention. During a complex scenario that combined multiple elements, Sarah demonstrated exceptional problem-solving ability. When her simulated weapon was knocked from her hands during an engagement, she immediately transitioned to hand-to-hand combat techniques while maneuvering toward where the weapon had fallen. Instead of directly attempting to retrieve the weapon, which would have left her vulnerable to attack, she used defensive movements to create space and then quickly recovered the weapon while maintaining awareness of her opponent's position. The fluid transition between different combat modes impressed both the instructors and her fellow candidates. Wednesday's training focused on combat swimming and maritime infiltration techniques. The candidates learned advanced swimming methods used by SEAL teams to approach targets from the water while carrying equipment and maintaining stealth. The session began in the base swimming pool, where candidates practiced various swimming strokes designed to minimize surface disturbance and noise. Traditional swimming techniques were modified to reduce splash and maintain a lower profile in the water. Sarah's natural swimming ability and smaller profile made her particularly effective at these stealth techniques. She was able to move through the water with minimal disturbance while maintaining good speed and control. Her technique was so effective that Master Chief Sullivan used her as a demonstration model for the other candidates. Watch Martinez's approach, he instructed the class. Notice how she minimizes lateral movement and keeps her stroke smooth and controlled. The water barely ripples around her. The training progressed to include swimming with equipment, simulating real-world infiltration missions where SEAL teams had to transport weapons, communications gear, and other mission-essential equipment through the water. This added significant complexity to the swimming techniques and required candidates to maintain buoyancy control while managing awkward loads. Sarah struggled initially with the equipment transport exercises. The additional weight and bulk of the simulated gear affected her natural swimming rhythm, and she had to develop new techniques for maintaining balance and control in the water. Through persistent practice and coaching from Master Chief Sullivan, she learned to redistribute the equipment load and modify her swimming technique to accommodate the additional challenges. By the end of the session, she was moving through the water effectively despite the equipment burden. The final element of the maritime training took place in the ocean, where candidates had to demonstrate their ability to navigate and function in realistic conditions. The Pacific Ocean presented challenges that couldn't be replicated in a swimming pool, including currents, waves, and cold water that tested both physical and mental resilience. The ocean exercise required candidates to swim approximately 500 meters from shore, conduct a simulated reconnaissance mission around a floating platform, and then return to shore without being detected by observers positioned along the beach. Sarah entered the cold ocean water with confidence, having prepared extensively for this type of challenge during her pre-training preparation. The water temperature was approximately 60 degrees, cold enough to cause rapid heat loss, but not immediately dangerous for short-duration exposure. As she swam toward the target platform, Sarah had to contend with ocean swells that periodically obscured her vision and made navigation more challenging. She used techniques learned during her earlier navigation training to maintain her bearing despite the changing conditions. The reconnaissance portion of the mission required her to approach the platform closely enough to gather detailed intelligence while remaining undetected by the instructors who were acting as opposing forces. This required careful timing and precise movement to take advantage of wave patterns and blind spots. Sarah successfully completed the reconnaissance mission, gathering all required information while maintaining stealth throughout the approach. Her small profile and careful movement techniques allowed her to remain undetected even when she was quite close to the platform. The return swim proved to be more challenging than the approach because fatigue was beginning to accumulate and the cold water was starting to affect her muscle function. Sarah had to consciously focus on maintaining proper swimming technique as her body began to stiffen from the cold exposure. When she finally reached the beach, Sarah felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The ocean exercise had tested every aspect of her maritime training while adding the complexity of realistic environmental conditions. She had performed well under pressure and had demonstrated that her training preparation was paying dividends. Thursday's training introduced stress shooting exercises, where candidates had to demonstrate marksmanship skills while under various forms of physical and psychological stress. This training was critical because SEAL operators often had to engage targets accurately after strenuous physical activity or while experiencing combat stress. The exercise began with baseline marksmanship testing to establish each candidate's accuracy level under ideal conditions. Sarah had always been a competent marksman, and her scores during the baseline testing were solid though not exceptional compared to some of her classmates who had specialized military occupations involving extensive shooting. The stress factors were introduced gradually, beginning with physical exertion immediately prior to shooting. Candidates had to complete a demanding obstacle course and then immediately transition to precision shooting at various distances. Sarah found that her cardiovascular fitness served her well during this exercise. While many of her classmates struggled with elevated heart rate and breathing difficulties that affected their shooting accuracy, she was able to recover quickly from the physical exertion and maintain steady marksmanship. The psychological stress factors proved to be more challenging. Instructors introduced time pressure, loud noises, and simulated combat scenarios designed to test the candidate's ability to maintain accuracy under mental stress. During one particularly challenging scenario, Sarah had to engage multiple targets while instructors shouted conflicting commands and activated smoke machines that obscured her vision. The combination of sensory overload and performance pressure created a challenging environment that tested both technical skill and mental resilience. Sarah relied on her combat experience to compartmentalize the distractions and focus on the fundamentals of marksmanship. She maintained proper breathing control, sight alignment, and trigger control despite the chaos around her. Her scores during the stress shooting were among the highest in the class. Excellent stress management, Martinez, the marksmanship instructor, observed. You maintained technical fundamentals despite significant environmental pressure. Friday's training culminated the week with a comprehensive combat exercise that integrated all the skills they had been developing. The scenario involved a complex mission where teams had to infiltrate a target area, engage in combat operations, and extract while under pursuit by opposing forces. Sarah's team was assigned a particularly challenging mission that required them to approach their target through water, conduct a direct action raid, and then escape through hostile territory while carrying simulated casualties. The mission began with a night infiltration swim similar to the exercise they had completed earlier in the week, but with the added complexity of carrying combat equipment and coordinating as a team in the dark water. Sarah took point during the swim approach, using her proven maritime skills to guide the team toward their target while maintaining stealth and group cohesion. The cold water and equipment load made the swim more challenging than their previous training exercises, but the team successfully reached their objective. The direct action portion of the mission required them to assault a simulated enemy position using the combat techniques they had been practicing throughout the week. Sarah's role was to provide suppressive fire while other team members maneuvered to assault positions. The combat scenario was intense and realistic, with opposing forces using simulation ammunition and pyrotechnics to create a chaotic battlefield environment. Sarah had to apply her marksmanship skills while moving through difficult terrain and coordinating with her teammates. During the assault, one of her teammates was designated as a casualty, requiring the team to modify their tactics and adapt to the loss of a team member. Sarah immediately took on additional responsibilities, helping to coordinate the casualty evacuation while continuing to provide combat support. The extraction phase of the mission proved to be the most challenging portion of the entire exercise. The team had to move several kilometers through hostile territory while carrying their simulated casualty and avoiding detection by pursuing enemy forces. Sarah's navigation skills were crucial during this phase of the mission. She guided the team through complex terrain using night vision techniques and map reading skills while maintaining security and helping to carry the casualty. The pursuit forces used realistic tactics to track and intercept the escaping team, creating genuine pressure and urgency during the extraction. Sarah had to make real-time tactical decisions about route selection and movement techniques while coordinating with her exhausted teammates. When the team finally reached the extraction point, they had successfully completed one of the most complex and demanding exercises of the entire program. Sarah felt physically and mentally drained, but also deeply satisfied with her performance throughout the mission. Chief Thompson's debrief of the exercise was highly positive for Sarah's team. He praised their tactical flexibility, effective teamwork under pressure, and successful adaptation to changing mission requirements. He specifically mentioned Sarah's leadership during the navigation and casualty evacuation portions of the mission. Martinez showed exceptional tactical thinking and leadership under pressure, Chief Thompson observed. Her ability to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining team cohesion was exactly what we want to see from future SEAL operators. As the fifth week concluded, Sarah reflected on the significant progress she had made in developing combat skills and stress tolerance. The advanced training had pushed her beyond her previous comfort zones and had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. More importantly, she had earned the complete respect and confidence of her teammates and instructors through her consistent performance under pressure. The initial skepticism about her presence in the program had been completely replaced by recognition of her capabilities and contributions to team success. The weekend break provided an opportunity for rest and recovery before entering the sixth week of the program, which would focus on leadership development and advanced tactical planning. Sarah used the time to reflect on her experiences and prepare mentally for the challenges that lay ahead in the final weeks of the preparatory program. The sixth week brought an unexpected shift in the program dynamics when Chief Thompson announced that they would be receiving a new instructor for their Advanced Combat Techniques course. Instructor Carlos Mendez arrived Monday morning with a reputation that preceded him among the candidates who had researched the SEAL training cadre. Mendez was a recently retired SEAL Master Chief with over 20 years of operational experience, including multiple deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations around the world. His service record included participation in some of the most challenging special operations missions of the past 2 decades, and his expertise in close-quarters combat was legendary within the special operations community. What made his arrival particularly significant was his well-known skepticism about women in combat roles, an attitude that had been documented in several military publications and interviews. Sarah knew that his assignment to their program represented a deliberate test of her capabilities and resolve. During the initial formation Monday morning, Instructor Mendez stood before the candidates with an imposing presence that commanded immediate attention. At 6 feet 2 inches tall with a muscular build and weathered features that spoke of years in combat zones, he embodied the image of an elite special operator. "I've been brought in to evaluate your readiness for the next phase of training," Mendez announced, his eyes scanning the formation. "Some of you have been performing adequately in the basic skills, but now we're going to find out who has what it takes for the real thing." His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than on the other candidates, and she could sense the skepticism in his assessment. She had encountered similar attitudes during her Marine career, particularly during her early assignments, and she understood that actions would speak louder than any words she might offer. The first lesson under Instructor Mendez focused on advanced close-quarters combat techniques that went beyond the basic defensive moves they had been learning. The session took place in a specialized training facility equipped with various simulation apparatus designed to replicate urban combat environments. "Combat isn't a sport with rules and referees," Mendez explained as he demonstrated the techniques. "When your life is on the line, you use whatever works, and you use it with maximum aggression and effectiveness." The techniques he taught were significantly more intense and realistic than anything they had practiced previously. The movements were designed for maximum effectiveness in life-or-death situations, with little regard for the niceties of sporting competition or training safety. Sarah found herself struggling initially with the level of aggression that Mendez demanded. Her previous martial arts training had emphasized control and precision, but these techniques required her to commit fully to potentially dangerous movements that could cause serious injury if executed incorrectly. "Martinez," Mendez called out during a practice session, "you're holding back. In combat, hesitation will get you killed and might get your teammates killed too." Sarah nodded and attempted to increase her intensity, but she could see that Mendez remained unimpressed with her performance. She was executing the techniques correctly from a technical standpoint, but she was struggling to achieve the level of controlled aggression that he was demanding. The session progressed to include scenario-based training where candidates had to apply the combat techniques in simulated realistic situations. The scenarios were designed to test decision-making under pressure as much as physical technique. During one particularly challenging scenario, Sarah found herself in a simulated hostage rescue situation where she had to neutralize an opponent while avoiding harm to a simulated civilian. The scenario required split-second decision-making and precise execution under extreme time pressure. Sarah's first attempt at the scenario was technically sound, but too slow for Instructor Mendez's standards. Again, he ordered faster decision, more aggressive execution. On her second attempt, Sarah committed more fully to the aggressive technique that the situation demanded. She successfully neutralized the simulated threat while protecting the civilian, but Mendez still appeared unimpressed with her performance. "Better," he said grudgingly, "but still not good enough for real-world application." The criticism stung, particularly because Sarah felt that she had performed the scenario correctly and effectively. However, she also understood that Mendez was applying a different standard to her performance, one that might be influenced by his preconceptions about women in combat roles. Tuesday's training focused on weapons handling and combat shooting under stress, an area where Sarah had previously excelled during the program. Instructor Mendez introduced advanced techniques that went beyond basic marksmanship to include tactical shooting in confined spaces and target engagement under extreme time pressure. The training began with close-quarters battle shooting techniques that required candidates to engage multiple targets rapidly while moving through a simulated building environment. The scenarios were designed to replicate the challenging conditions that SEAL teams encountered during direct action missions. Sarah approached the training with confidence, knowing that her marksmanship skills were among her strongest capabilities. She had consistently scored well during previous shooting exercises and felt prepared for the increased complexity that Mendez was introducing. The first scenario required candidates to move through a simulated building while engaging targets that appeared at various locations and distances. The course was designed to test both shooting accuracy and tactical movement under pressure. Sarah's performance during the first run-through was solid, with good accuracy and effective movement between positions. However, when she completed the course, Instructor Mendez had detailed criticisms of her technique. "Your shooting is adequate," he said, "but your movement is too cautious. In a real building clearance, that hesitation would expose your team to unnecessary risk." Sarah accepted the feedback and attempted to increase her movement speed during subsequent repetitions of the course. However, she found that faster movement affected her shooting accuracy, creating a difficult balance between speed and precision. Instructor Mendez seemed to be applying a particularly rigorous standard to her performance, offering more detailed criticism of her techniques than he provided to other candidates. Sarah began to suspect that he was deliberately creating additional pressure to test her psychological resilience as much as her technical skills. Wednesday's training introduced the most challenging physical exercises the candidates had encountered during the program. Instructor Mendez designed a series of combat conditioning drills that combined functional strength training with realistic combat movements. The session began with a warm-up that was more demanding than many of the previous training sessions had been in their entirety. Candidates performed bear crawls, military presses, and other functional movements while carrying weighted packs that simulated combat loads. Sarah found the physical demands challenging but manageable, drawing on the extensive conditioning work she had done during her preparation for the program. Her smaller frame required her to work harder to carry the same weights as her larger classmates, but her cardiovascular fitness and mental toughness allowed her to maintain pace. The main portion of the session involved what Mendez called combat circuits, complex combinations of physical exercises and tactical movements that simulated the demands of prolonged combat operations. The circuits required candidates to maintain high performance levels over extended periods while transitioning between different types of physical challenges. One particularly demanding circuit required candidates to perform a series of lifting and carrying exercises, transition immediately to precision shooting, then complete an obstacle course while carrying simulated casualties. The entire circuit had to be completed within strict time limits, while maintaining high-performance standards throughout. Sarah struggled with the heavy lifting portions of the circuit due to her size disadvantage, but she compensated by performing the other elements with exceptional efficiency. Her shooting remained accurate despite fatigue, and her agility allowed her to complete the obstacle portions faster than most of her classmates. However, Instructor Mendez continued to focus his criticism on her performance during the strength-intensive portions of the exercises. "Martinez, you're barely meeting minimum standards on the heavy lifting," he observed. "In combat, there won't be someone else available to carry the heavy equipment for you." The comment was particularly frustrating for Sarah because she was meeting all the established standards for the exercises, but Mendez seemed to be applying additional, unspoken requirements to her performance. She began to understand that this was as much a test of her psychological resilience as her physical capabilities. Thursday's training focused on team leadership exercises where candidates took turns leading their teams through complex tactical scenarios. Each candidate was evaluated on their ability to plan missions, communicate effectively, and make decisions under pressure. Sarah approached the leadership exercises with anticipation, knowing that her tactical knowledge and decision-making abilities were among her strongest assets. She had successfully led teams during her Marine deployments and felt confident in her ability to perform well in this area. When her turn came to lead a simulated patrol mission, Sarah spent considerable time on mission planning and preparation. She analyzed the scenario thoroughly, developed contingency plans, and ensured that every team member understood their role and responsibilities. The mission execution went smoothly, with Sarah demonstrating effective communication and tactical decision-making throughout the exercise. Her team successfully completed their objectives while avoiding the various challenges and obstacles that Instructor Mendez had incorporated into the scenario. However, during the post-mission debrief, Mendez offered a surprisingly harsh critique of her leadership performance. He questioned several of her tactical decisions and suggested that her communication style was too collaborative for effective military leadership. "Leadership in combat requires quick, decisive action," he said. "Your tendency to seek consensus and explain your decisions slows down the decision-making process and could compromise mission effectiveness." Sarah disagreed with this assessment, believing that effective communication with team members actually improved mission performance by ensuring that everyone understood their roles and could adapt to changing circumstances. However, she chose not to argue with Mendez's evaluation, understanding that this was likely part of his testing process. The week continued with increasingly challenging exercises that seemed specifically designed to test Sarah's limits and patience. Instructor Mendez maintained a consistently critical attitude toward her performance, offering praise grudgingly and focusing his feedback on areas where she struggled due to physical limitations rather than skill deficiencies. By Friday, the cumulative effect of the constant criticism was beginning to wear on Sarah's confidence. She found herself second-guessing decisions and techniques that she had previously executed with confidence, and she could see that the psychological pressure was beginning to affect her performance. The final exercise of the week was designed to test individual combat skills under maximum stress. Candidates had to complete a series of combat techniques while subjected to various forms of psychological and physical pressure designed to simulate combat conditions. Sarah's turn came late in the day, after she had watched several of her classmates complete the exercise with varying degrees of success. The accumulated stress and fatigue of the week had taken their toll, and she approached the exercise feeling less confident than usual. The exercise began with a close-quarters combat scenario where Sarah had to defend against multiple simulated attackers while protecting a simulated civilian. The scenario required her to apply all the techniques she had been learning while making split-second decisions under extreme pressure. Sarah's initial performance was tentative, reflecting her decreased confidence and overthinking of her techniques. She successfully completed the basic requirements of the scenario, but with less efficiency and aggression than she had demonstrated in previous training. "Stop," Instructor Mendez called out halfway through the exercise. "Martinez, you're performing like someone who's afraid of getting hurt. This is exactly the kind of hesitation that will get people killed in combat." The criticism was delivered in front of all her classmates and the other instructors, creating additional public pressure on top of the already challenging exercise. Sarah could feel her frustration and anger building as she prepared to restart the scenario. "Reset and try again," Mendez ordered. "And this time, perform like you actually belong here." The comment was clearly intended to provoke a response, and Sarah felt her anger spike at the implication that she didn't belong in the program. She had proven herself repeatedly over the past 6 weeks, and the suggestion that she wasn't qualified was both unfair and inflammatory. However, instead of responding verbally to the provocation, Sarah channeled her anger into her performance during the second attempt at the exercise. She attacked the scenario with renewed aggression and commitment, applying the combat techniques with the full intensity that Mendez had been demanding. Her movements became fluid and decisive, reflecting the combination of technical skill and mental toughness that she had developed throughout the program. She neutralized the simulated threats efficiently while protecting the civilian, demonstrating exactly the kind of performance that Mendez claimed she was incapable of achieving. When she completed the exercise, there was a moment of silence as Mendez evaluated her performance. Sarah stood at attention, breathing hard from the exertion but feeling a sense of satisfaction at having risen to the challenge. "Better," Mendez said finally. "That's the level of performance I expect from someone who wants to be a SEAL operator." The qualified praise was the first positive feedback Sarah had received from Instructor Mendez all week, and she felt a mixture of relief and continued frustration at having to prove herself under such artificially challenging circumstances. As the week concluded, Sarah reflected on the psychological challenges that Mendez had presented. She understood that his testing had been designed to evaluate her resilience under adversity and her ability to maintain performance standards despite criticism and pressure. While she had ultimately met the challenges he presented, she also recognized that the experience had been deliberately more difficult for her than for her male classmates. This realization prepared her for the likelihood that similar challenges would continue throughout her military career. The weekend provided an opportunity to decompress and prepare for the 7th week of the program, which would focus on advanced tactical operations and mission planning. Sarah used the time to rebuild her confidence and remind herself of the consistent high performance she had demonstrated throughout the program. Her classmates, particularly David and Alex, offered support and perspective on her experiences with Instructor Mendez. They confirmed that his treatment of her had been notably different from his interactions with other candidates, and they expressed their continued confidence in her abilities. "Don't let him get in your head," David advised. "You've proven yourself over and over again. Some people are just going to test you harder because of who you are, not because of what you can do." Sarah appreciated the support from her teammates, and it helped her maintain perspective on the challenges she was facing. She understood that proving herself in male-dominated fields would always require dealing with skeptics and critics, but she was determined not to let those challenges derail her pursuit of her goals. As she prepared for the final weeks of the preparatory program, Sarah felt confident that she had developed the physical capabilities, technical skills, and mental toughness necessary to succeed in the actual SEAL training program. The experience with Instructor Mendez had been challenging, but it had also proven to her that she could maintain her performance standards even under artificially difficult circumstances. The 7th week would bring new challenges and the final evaluation that would determine whether she would be recommended for the actual basic underwater demolition/SEAL training program. Sarah felt ready for whatever tests awaited her, knowing that she had already overcome obstacles that would have defeated many candidates who possessed greater natural physical advantages. The 7th week began with an atmosphere of anticipation and tension as the remaining candidates understood that their final evaluation was approaching. Of the original 30 candidates who had started the program, only 18 remained, with the others having either voluntarily withdrawn or been dismissed for failing to meet performance standards. Sarah had successfully navigated all the challenges of the previous 6 weeks, but she knew that Instructor Mendez would likely present his most demanding tests during this final phase. She approached the week with a combination of confidence earned through consistent performance and wariness about what new obstacles might be placed in her path. Monday morning began with what Chief Thompson announced would be the final comprehensive physical fitness assessment. Unlike the baseline testing they had completed during the first week, this evaluation would test their capabilities after nearly 2 months of intensive training and conditioning. The assessment began with a timed run that covered 4 miles across varied terrain including beach sand, hills, and obstacle courses. Sarah had always been a strong runner, and the weeks of conditioning had improved her speed and endurance significantly. She positioned herself near the front of the group as they began the run, matching pace with the strongest runners in the class. The varied terrain required different techniques and energy management strategies, but Sarah had learned to adapt her running style to whatever surface she encountered. As they crested the first major hill at the 2-mile mark, Sarah found herself running alongside Jake and David, both of whom had emerged as 2 of the strongest overall performers in the program. The fact that she was keeping pace with them demonstrated how much her conditioning had improved over the past weeks. "You're looking strong, Martinez," David said as they maintained their rhythm down the far side of the hill. Sarah smiled but saved her breath for the running, knowing that the most challenging portions of the course were still ahead. The final 2 miles included a section of soft sand that would test everyone's leg strength and mental toughness. When they reached the sand portion, several runners began to fall back as the unstable surface demanded additional energy expenditure. Sarah's lighter weight worked to her advantage here, allowing her to maintain good pace, while some of the heavier candidates struggled with the energy costs of running on sand. She finished the 4-mile run in 3rd place overall, with a time that represented a significant improvement over her baseline performance from the first week. More importantly, she felt strong and controlled throughout the run, indicating that her conditioning base was solid. The strength assessment portion of the fitness test proved more challenging, as it emphasized the areas where her smaller size created natural disadvantages. However, weeks of focused strength training had improved her performance significantly in exercises like pull-ups, push-ups, and functional lifting movements. During the pull-up portion, Sarah completed 22 repetitions with strict form, a substantial improvement over her initial performance. Her technique had become more efficient, and her upper body strength had increased noticeably through consistent training. The combat-oriented strength exercises proved to be her strongest area, as they emphasized functional movement patterns that played to her technical skills rather than pure lifting capacity. She excelled at movements that required coordination, agility, and precise technique combined with strength. Instructor Mendez observed the fitness testing carefully, recording detailed notes about each candidate's performance. When Sarah completed her assessment, he offered no immediate feedback, but she could see him comparing her results to previous evaluations. Tuesday's training introduced the most technically complex combat scenarios the candidates had encountered. The exercises were designed to test their ability to integrate all the skills they had developed over the previous weeks while operating under realistic combat stress. The first scenario required teams to conduct a simulated hostage rescue operation in an urban environment. The exercise combined close-quarters combat, tactical movement, precision shooting, and team coordination under extreme time pressure. Sarah's team was assigned the lead assault role, requiring them to breach a simulated building, neutralize hostile forces, and extract hostages while minimizing casualties. The scenario demanded split-second decision-making and flawless execution of combat techniques. As the team prepared for the exercise, Sarah found herself naturally taking a leadership role in the tactical planning. Her combat experience and analytical approach to problem-solving made her effective at identifying potential complications and developing contingency plans. "We need to think about angles of fire and civilian safety," she said as the team reviewed their approach. "Speed is important, but precision is more important when hostages are involved." The team's execution of the hostage rescue was nearly flawless. Sarah's role involved providing precise covering fire while her teammates maneuvered to assault positions. Her shooting was accurate and controlled, neutralizing simulated threats without endangering the hostages. During the most critical phase of the operation, when the team had to clear the final room containing the hostages, Sarah demonstrated exceptional tactical awareness. She identified a potential threat that other team members had missed and neutralized it with a precise shot that prevented a simulated casualty. The after-action review of the exercise was overwhelmingly positive, with instructors praising the team's coordination and tactical execution. Sarah's performance was specifically highlighted for her shooting accuracy and tactical awareness during the critical phases of the operation. Even Instructor Mendez acknowledged her performance during the debrief. "Martinez showed good tactical thinking and precise execution under pressure," he said, offering the first unqualified praise she had received from him. Wednesday's training focused on what the instructors called the stress culmination exercise, a complex scenario designed to test every aspect of their training while subjecting them to maximum physical and psychological pressure. The exercise began before dawn with a forced march carrying full combat loads across challenging terrain. The march covered 8 miles and served as both a conditioning challenge and the approach phase for a multi-part tactical scenario. Sarah started the march feeling strong and confident, having developed excellent load-carrying endurance over the course of the program. Her pack weighed 45 pounds, lighter than what her male teammates carried but proportional to her body weight and in line with realistic combat loads. As the march progressed through hills and rough terrain, several candidates began to struggle with the pace and the weight of their equipment. Sarah maintained her position near the front of the formation, demonstrating that her conditioning and mental toughness were equal to the demands of the exercise. The march concluded at a simulated forward operating base where the teams received their mission briefings for a complex multi-phase operation. Sarah's team was assigned a reconnaissance and direct action mission that would require them to gather intelligence and then conduct an assault on a high-value target. The reconnaissance phase required the team to move several kilometers through hostile territory while avoiding detection by opposing forces. Sarah's navigation and tactical movement skills were crucial during this portion of the mission. She guided the team through challenging terrain while maintaining stealth and operational security. Her